Bitcoin is a commodity, and there's two reasons for this. Bitcoin is a commodity because you have digital decentralized transactions, right? Without an intermediary. We understand that. But in the white paper, there's another point here, and Jack missed this on Block. He was talking about there's only one thing in the white paper. No, there's two. It's decentralized governance, and that's what sets Bitcoin apart from all the other crypto. Is that it has decentralized digital transactions, no intermediary, and it has decentralized governance. That's why it's a commodity. That's why it doesn't pass the Howey test. And ETH passes the Howey test on all four of those because it doesn't have decentralized governance. And the SEC is considering of treating ETH like a commodity. This is wrong. I've already written a comment on there. And the reason why I bring this up is because I would love to, if they go through with this, I would like to file a suit against the SEC. Problem is I'm not a lawyer. I need a lawyer that's in the District of Columbia that can file. I'd be happy to do the heavy lifting of writing these arguments. But yeah, if there's any lawyers in DC, contact me or DM me or go to Solston.com and you can contact me there.
It's super interesting because you gave me that paper also beforehand, and it lines out like the John Nash is like the cryptographer. But one thing that is super interesting also that you wrote about the Big Bang project and all those things that might point to him actually being Satoshi Nakamoto. And then there's like this question of like if he understood the implications of that and the importance of doing that, he probably also understood that he needs to have it to himself and not put his face and his name to there.
Well, yeah, I mean, those are three topics you just covered. First of all, he understood how important it was. First of all, this Keynesianism was destroying his Nash equilibrium, right? It was a threat to Nash equilibrium is just the mathematics between supply and demand. So it's this Adam Smith wealth of nations, and Adam Smith called it the invisible hand. And here comes Nash, creates a finite Nash equilibrium, does the math, and so it's no longer invisible hand, it's Nash equilibrium. And after you do the exchange, everyone can share the utility of those exchanges. So that's Nash equilibrium. But get back to the cryptography. Well, so I want to bring this up. He wrote in 1955 when he was at Rand, he was warning the NSA. He wrote them a letter, and he was talking about a trap door. And I'm like, what is a trap door? It's basically a one-way algorithm where you can create it in one direction easily, but going back is difficult. I mean, we understand that, that's a hash now. But he was describing that the trap door to the NSA. And then he went on to say that, there's a real danger that secure cipher systems might be devised by someone and that such a system might be unbreakable. Well, he was warning against Bitcoin. He was saying somebody might do this. And it turns out, I believe he went ahead and did just that. And this work was declassified in 2012. This letter that went directly to the NSA from Nash, who really understood fundamentally this public and private key, not to that level, but he understood it 20 years before that RSA came out. So yeah, in terms of cryptography, he was ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I got a lot of because I looked at the comments and some of them said like, oh, could he even like write C++? Could he even write code? And was it even good in software engineering? A lot of those questions came up, and I think in the last episode we did on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a lot of programmers out there. They say, oh, I've been schooled in programming, and it's like, well, and what else do you do? If you don't have anything else to do, I mean, you're like an empty vassal. And so computer programming is great, but you also need to be an expert in something else. And Nash, what he did is 1983, he was going down to uh, every day he was going down to the computer lab, and that's what he was doing for his what he called his occupational therapy. And in other words, it helped him start to reason again and get his faculties back. So he was down there every day in the computer and just programming. And there's also reports of he would be talking to someone and he would just kind of disappear for several days, and he'd come back with reams of paper and saying, this is a way we can do that. And it's not just a way we can do this, but he would do it that would last 1,000 years. I mean, it was like one of those things where he would just take it to an extreme. He really liked doing that. And so he was credited for being very talented to programming. And it's not about programming. He was a great thinker. And so do you have to be a good programmer to be able to think? No, he was a great thinker. And because of that, he was credited for writing good software. But and he did, there was some exposure to C++. But what's more interesting than that is, in his dissertation, non-cooperative games, he illustrates it with poker at the very end. And at the very beginning of Bitcoin code, the first release, there was poker stuff in there. So, there's strong Nash Nakamoto connections. And this guy was very much a lone genius in all the work that he did. And so for him to be a lone genius in writing software, it's really not a change in his lifestyle.
Yeah, also this was my kind of response. Always like I wasn't aware that he actually was every day in a computer lab and did the work. But even if that wouldn't be the case, a guy with his understanding and his intellect, he can figure out how to code. This is not the hard part of getting Bitcoin up and running.
So even after his recovery, Shapley was somebody that he knew way back in Princeton, and they weren't buddy, but they respected each other as mathematicians, and there was a great deal of respect between the two. And Shapley visited with him after his recovery and asked him what he was doing. He goes, he's working on software, and he called it the Big Bang. And Shapley actually referenced, hey, I saw, and publicly said, yeah, he's working on some software called the Big Bang, and I wish him the best. And by this time, Shapley had moved up at some high level, some university, and his career was amazing. And so that was the way he described it. It's eerily close to what Bitcoin could be. It could be the Big Bang.
What was he describing? Is that just something like is there like some writing or from Shapley that you know of, like how did he describe the Big Bang project?
Well, keep in mind that reference that I got on the Big Bang that he told Shapley comes out of a book, A Beautiful Mind, which the movie was based on that, right? And at that time, Bitcoin didn't exist when that book was written. Right. So how do you make the connection that the Big Bang is going to become Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin, the word didn't even exist. So is Bitcoin a Big Bang? I would say by every measure, yes.
It's probably the biggest bang, especially in financial history. That's super interesting when we think about all those things. Is there? How can we go ahead about that? But it's for me when we think about the John Nash is Satoshi Nakamoto, then we can also entertain the implications of that, because we already talked about like, okay, the implications of what if ideal money comes to us, but then also like what are the implications of if John Nash is Satoshi Nakamoto? Does this change how we look at the origin of Bitcoin? Does this like has anything to do with Bitcoin at this point, especially because John Nash is dead? So like it's I have sometimes problems with people say someone is Satoshi Nakamoto if this person is alive and this person says no to it. Then it's like you point basically attack vectors and someone to him, and so like with John Nash being in that, I think I don't have a problem with that at all. And so it's interesting what the implications are if John Nash actually is Satoshi Nakamoto.
Well, let's look at the pedigree. I mean, what are the implications? I mean, for John Nash, who had to take a course from Bert Hoslitz and he had to do all these calculations and, try to understand the value of, like, for example, Germany might have an excess of knives and England might have an excess of textiles. And how do you have a standard measurement of value between those two different commodities? And what if we have an excess of corn here in the United States? So how do we find parity? How do we find this equilibrium? And it's much more difficult when you have different currencies. As you know, nobody would argue, as it was written in 1928, nobody would argue that every single state in the United States should have a different currency. It's just a lot better. And it would have been a lot easier for John Nash to figure out these things without, if they had one currency across two different international nation states, it would have made those problems that were given to him from Bert Hoslitz a lot easier. So for him, it was hey, this is obvious. This made, finding parity and finding equilibrium for these international trade agreements a lot easier. And so that's the first implication from John Nash. And so this was a lifelong pursuit on John Nash's. How do we achieve one currency in the world? And it turns out you can't work cooperatively on this because those powers are not going to give it up. And so you really have to play a game theory. You have to play non-cooperative games. And so this was a lifelong pursuit that was already put into motion at the University of Chicago, taught to him in Carnegie. And then he took it to Princeton and wrote non-cooperative games. Nash equilibrium is just finite. But when a Nobel Prize committee member came and interviewed him to see if he was, stable enough to be able to handle this award, this Nobel Prize, he asked him if he was going to be looking, for in his future studies about irrational actors, and Nash replied. He says he wanted to work on an immortal Nash equilibrium, not finite, infinite. And this has implications for us as Bitcoiners. What is the narrative? Well, if you believe Nash was the creator of Bitcoin, you believe we're heading towards ideal money, and that Bitcoin is an emerging Bitcoin equilibrium. We will have a standard measurement of value. We're going to make international trade a lot easier. Long-term contracts are going to be a lot more stable. Supply chain is going to be far more efficient. Um, and so that Bitcoin equilibrium, really, that emerging Bitcoin equilibrium, is what he told that committee member from the Nobel Prize committee. He wanted to work on an immortal Nash equilibrium. And Bitcoin is that. Bitcoin is emerging to become an immortal Nash equilibrium.
How do you actually look at other candidates for Satoshi Nakamoto when we look at Adam Back, Nick Szabo, Hal Finney? I even heard Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. So that there's so many different theories out there. For me personally, the John Nash one makes the most sense. It's like the best one for me. But how do you look at like other theories?
I think, like, if you go out and talk to AI or ChatGPT or some of these others and say who has the most connections with Nakamoto, and I think Nick Szabo is, the leader in that. But if you really look at all the connections that Nash and Nakamoto have, they're far more than what Szabo has. And Nick Szabo brilliant guy. I mean, amazing human being in many respects. And but he produced, let's say, in Bitgold, fragments that could, let's say, translate into Bitcoin. But let's compare Nash and Szabo. Nash laid out a blueprint for Bitcoin. It, when you study these Nash Nakamoto connections, the game theory, non-cooperative games, the economics, this is a blueprint for ideal money. It is. I mean, that was his lifetime pursuit. And so, what really points to the creator of Bitcoin? Fragments of code or the blueprint for Bitcoin? The big picture. And Nash had that big picture.
One guy, I just read the comment, said also not true because John Nash is not Adam Back, and I've one because I truly believe Adam Back is not Satoshi Nakamoto, and there's like
No.
one very, very simple reason for that, because Adam Back is in the white paper, and Satoshi Nakamoto would never go through all this trouble to be not known and then write his own name into the white paper. Like that sounds so irrational to me.
Yeah, I mean, people look at Nakamoto and they think, oh, what a cool guy. Let's wear a hoodie and swing a samurai sword around, and I'm Satoshi Nakamoto. This is a person who had elite education. Okay, a person who was that good at cryptography, programming, economics. This was not a young kid, a dropout person that decided to save the world. This is a person who had an amazing broad education and super talented. And I believe it was one person, because if you had more people involved, we would know who it is for sure, without a doubt. You just can't keep secrets like this. But Robin, you know what? I want to jump ahead on this one topic. This is a guy named John Golson, who I follow on Twitter, and he loves to um, tweet about Nash a little bit broader than I do. I mean, he likes to cover many aspects of Nash, and John Golson really understands the mathematics um, in a powerful way. And recently, he came up with another. And I wrote about 18 Nash Nakamoto connections, and he came up with another one. And I've been documenting. If you go to like Solston.com, John Nash, I have about 70 references because the people couldn't follow them in my book. The URLs were just way too long. So I was requested to put it on a page, so I did. So you can follow the links and just, I mean, rather than buy the book, just go there and read all the references, and you'll really get the feel of these Nash Nakamoto connections. And then in addition to that, at the very bottom, whenever another strong Nash Nakamoto connection comes up, I document it at the very bottom, and with the intent of writing, Satoshi's Mentor book, like maybe in 2 years from now. Hopefully, I'll have some time to do that. But I documented that recently from John Golson, and basically, just hang with me on this. It's really good. It was an unpublished paper by Nash, but it says a logical system cannot effectively state its own consistency. This relates to the incompleteness originally found by Gödel. But one logical system can easily state the formal consistency of another system. We use this idea this is John Nash speaking, in an unpublished paper. We use this idea in creating our hierarchy of levels so that on a higher level, it is possible, in effect, to assume the validity and consistency of proceedings possible on lower levels. I mean, isn't that Bitcoin? I mean, if you really look at the Merkle tree and also, well, it's not really the Merkle tree, it's the previous blocks. And so you don't have to go back and do proof of work on all those old transactions. You just need a hash, and that's going to show you the congruency. So this is something that Nash is what he called hierarchical introspective logics, and he wrote this somewhere in between, probably around Fermat's last theorem proof, which was around 1993 or thereafter, but somewhere in the mid 1990s, and then the white paper was in 2008 came out. I mean, this is a very strong Nash-Nakamoto connection. And it was John Golson who found this document, that, and, because Bitcoin is a self-referential system. How can it, another system, how do you get away from that third party? How do you get away from some external reference validating these other systems? Well, he did that, and it's through the random miners. They're the ones that are doing the work, and then other nodes are validating that as they're going forward, and then they can kind of forget about it as they go forward, and all we have to worry about is the next few blocks, and all that other lower level, all that past, we can know it's valid because way back whenever they validated it. And that's really the secret. As we all know, the miners are the secret sauce of enabling these transactions without third parties.
There was another comment, a little bit not so nice, but I think it's an interesting topic to talk about. He wrote, "If true, you guys are assholes for talking about it. It's better for it to be unknown." I have to, like, if John Nash would be alive, I get the point. You don't want to say he is Satoshi Nakamoto, especially if he's thing. But is there something to it where Bitcoin benefits if we just don't know who he actually was?
No, that's not true. The narrative would become very clean if people understood Nash's, the original intent. A lot of this alt narrative would just be obliterated. That's false. That we need him dead, or excuse me, out of the way. But the other thing is calling me an asshole because I'm talking about it, because it's going to cause harm to Satoshi Nakamoto, or because he didn't want to be ever known. That's not true. I believe with Bitcoin being, let's say, internationally accepted now, and it's no longer considered subversive. And when he rolled it out, it was very much a subversive system, and that also tied in with his 25 years of paranoid schizophrenia. And so, yeah, he didn't want to be known. He didn't want to. He would have. He cared very dearly about the respect of his mathematician and his academic friends, but he didn't really care about the respect of just general people. And that, I believe that was kind of his coping mechanism, his way to get through a beautiful mind, because he became so famous, and a lot of people only focused on his illness, where his mathematical and economic colleagues treated him with respect for what he accomplished. And so, yeah, he didn't want to deal with that. But now that Satoshi Nakamoto is turning into a hero, I believe that John Nash would have come out of the woodwork. He would have come out of the shadows and would have claimed, this crown. I don't think it was, a lot of it had to do not being this cool kid in a hoodie, working on a laptop. By the way, laptops weren't all that available back then. Before 2008, it was workstations, okay, not laptops. He wasn't a hoodie guy. He was a respected professor at an elite university. He wasn't a dropout, and he rolled out a subversive software program that could have damaged his career.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.